And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wags at the sports desk across the glass.
John, it's Friday, and you know what that means. It's not Monday,
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
It's Friday.
Woohoo!
And the weekend is so close, you can almost taste it.
Tastes like pina colada.
Well, it is Jimmy Buffett Friday. Could taste like a banana daiquiri. Oh, you would love this. One of my favorite spots when I go on the cruise ship to the Caribbean is a hotel that is not far from the cruise ship port that's owned by an American Airlines flight attendant. It's a hotel, like a boutique hotel. And you don't have to stay there to go eat at the restaurant or drink at the bar. And they have a drink I've never seen on the menu before anywhere, and it is fantastic. Are you a fan of the pistachio nut ice cream at Rite Aid?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. They have a pistachio nut daiquiri at this particular hotel, and it tastes exactly like the pistachio nut ice cream at Thrifty, only it's got rum and lots of it in the drink.
And you said that's in the Caribbean?
It's at St. Croix, one of the U.S. Virgin Islands. You don't even have to leave the country. There you go. Someone's calling JetBlue. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It's a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcast. He's also the KABC legal analyst, Royal Oakes. Royal, welcome.
Hey, my pleasure, John. How are you?
I'm good. So many legal subjects to get into this week. Let's start out with the big deal with Iran, the prison swap, where we had, I guess it was 5 different Americans who were incarcerated in an Iranian prison. We want them out. Iran said, okay, that's fine, but it's going to cost you. As it turns out, the Biden administration agreed to give the Iranian government $6 billion with a B dollars to release these people from the prison. But here's the catch, Royal. They're not being sent back home to the United States. I guess we'd need to give them $7 billion for that. In exchange for the $6 billion, they're being transferred from the prison to house arrest. And my guess is they're not going to be living like the Shah, more like Aladdin when he was in the slums.
You know, it sounds like baby steps, and it sounds kind of ridiculous. I mean, it sounds like a bad idea to start with, and it's an even worse idea to trust them. I'm assuming that what's happening is that this is like a 5-step process. Okay, you got to move the $6 billion into our bank account, and some people get to move around, and your guys, they're going to go to house arrest for a while instead of being in some dungeon where they've reportedly been for years, and then they'll go free. So who knows what the specific steps are, but the bottom line is, you know, the idea of paying money to get hostages back. I mean, everybody has been talking ever since Iran-Contra in the Reagan era about how you don't do that because you just guarantee that then they're going to take more hostages because, oh, that's cool, $6 billion. That can buy a lot of stuff. Some countries have an outright ban, like the United Kingdom. They say, forget about it. We will not negotiate with terrorists. We will not pay money, etc. America doesn't have that ban. I mean, I mentioned Reagan, you know, arms for hostages thing. Reagan was totally focused on getting the hostages home. So he said, oh, you don't negotiate with terrorists. But he did it because he said, okay, Iran, here's some weapons. Give us the hostages. You pay for the weapons. Hey, we're going to take the money you gave us and buy arms for the Contras in Nicaragua, even though all of that is against the law. So then we get to the Biden administration, and he's following up on Obama's principle. And Obama had said, look, the president will use every appropriate resource to safely return U.S. nationals taken hostage. So we're not like England. We don't have a ban on it. But still, I think a lot of people are very critical of it because they look at it and they say, you know, we lose $6 billion, we get 5 guys. Next year, we're going to have to pay $10 billion to get 3 guys.
Well, and a lot of countries say that their policy is not to pay for hostages, not to pay ransom. However, they don't regard certain negotiations as ransom payments, even though that's effectively what they are. It's kind of like how some of the establishment news organizations look down their nose at the tabloids. They say, we don't pay individuals to sit down for interviews. We don't pay for stories. We don't do any of that. That's beneath us. But what they will do is they'll give you a quote-unquote travel budget if you do an exclusive interview with them, or they will pay you for pictures that will be used in the interview. They find some way to make sure that money goes from their bank account to your bank account in exchange for the story, but they don't call it payment for the story. They claim that they're paying you for some ancillary subject.
Yeah, so people circumvent the rules. They try to skirt the rules. In addition to that, I think one of the reasons that the Biden administration is going down this road of paying $6 billion to get the five guys back is that he hopes it's going to help progress in his administration's negotiations with Iran to limit their nuclear program. He thinks he's buying some goodwill, and everybody will get to know each other after negotiating hard. Oh, okay, we did the deal, let's shake hands. And now he thinks that he's going to limit their development of nuclear weapons. Well, good luck with that. I mean, is there any reason to believe that Iran is going to go down that road and curtail its nuclear program? I think it's just kind of a pipe dream that Biden is pursuing.
What do you make of the dollar amount? And I say that because, unfortunately, when bad things happen to people, if you're decapitated on a ride at Disneyland, or you're on a plane that crashes due to the negligence of the airline, or something bad happens to someone because someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, at some point when the family files suit and you go to court in front of a jury and a judge, or maybe you go to a corporate boardroom where you sit across the table from one another and just negotiate and try to figure out what the family is owed, there's a price tag that's put on an individual's head. And it's crass to think about, and it's crass, I would assume, to do if you're one of the attorneys that's involved, but it's something that happens, and it happens on a regular basis. No one that I can think of, even very rich people who have died in unfortunate circumstances, have ever gotten anything close to $6 billion. But for these five people to get them out, the U.S. government was willing to pay $6 billion, and that number is just humongous.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. I think that this is just a reflection of the fact that the Biden administration is so desperate to do this deal. They're willing to pay this kind of blockbuster number that really makes no sense. I mean, we've got it, and so, we're willing to pay it, even though he's only getting 5 detainees. I mean, and you're right. I mean, focus on that court example that you gave. In our system, it sounds crass in some contexts, but if somebody is hurt or if somebody is killed and there's nothing you can do to give somebody his arm back or the life back, you have to translate it to dollars. I mean, that's just the way the court system works. And it sounds crass, but evidence always comes in along the lines of, well, how old was this person? How many more years would he or she have worked? And how much would they have contributed to the family's estate? How much love and affection was an extended family, or were they a moody loner? All those things come into play. I mean, I remember back on the O.J. Simpson deal when Ron Goldman, of course, was murdered by O.J. And in the wrongful death case, the argument was, well, Ron was a wannabe actor. He was a waiter, and he probably, wouldn't have made a lot of money. And Bob Baker, the lawyer for O.J., actually said, well, this guy wouldn't have been able to get a credit card if he had been alive. Well, so people, criticized Bob for doing that. But the fact is, you look at the practical effect of snuffing out somebody's life or injuring somebody, and it translates to dollars here. As you say, nobody considers a person to be $1 billion or $1.1 billion person, adding up to $6 billion for 5 people. It really makes no sense.
Given the dollar amount, how do you think bad actors around the world are digesting this? And I say that because bad actors around the world will kidnap people for ransom if they know they can make money doing it. I'm thinking about the North Koreans. I'm thinking about the drug cartels. I'm thinking about the terrorist organizations. What do you think they're thinking as they sip their coffee, reading the morning paper, and looking at this number?
Absolutely. It's just going to encourage them to do really bad stuff. And, the perfect example of this is down in South America, where kidnappings are rampant. People buy kidnap insurance. You pay your $2,000 a year premium, and in return, that if your family member is kidnapped, Then the negotiations start, and the insurance company steps up to the plate. Oh, well, you've got $500,000 in coverage. And the kidnappers know what the policy terms are. Sometimes they even get to see the policies. And so it's all like a business negotiation thing. So, yeah, lots of bad stuff will lead to more hostages being taken if you start paying like this. And that's why it's so sad that if the real motivation is the Biden administration's Pollyanna-like expectation that, okay, we're going to get tight with our pals over in Tehran and then work out a nuclear deal, it's just not going to happen.
I don't know about you, but I'm just glad that Frank Sinatra Jr. isn't alive to see this story.
That's right. That poor guy. This is the stupidest man on the planet to kidnap Frank Sinatra's son. I mean, really.
We're speaking with Royal Oaks, KABC legal analyst. Royal, former California Secretary of Labor Julie Su, who was in charge of one of our worst performing departments statewide, which is saying something. She, of course, was responsible for billions and billions, tens of billions of dollars being stolen from the state of California by organized crime in the form of EDD fraud. She is Joe Biden's choice to be the next Secretary of Labor nationwide. She doesn't have the votes in the U.S. Senate, not just because Republicans won't support her, but a handful of Democrats have also said, no, this is one bridge too far for us. We're not going to support her when she comes up for a vote in the U.S. Senate. Because she doesn't have the votes, after a certain period of time, acting secretaries are supposed to go bye-bye. But the Biden administration has said that they believe that she can just remain as acting secretary forever, that she doesn't need a Senate vote, as the Constitution dictates, that she can just stick around as long as they want her there. What do you make of that?
Well, they're breaking the rules. I mean, he's nominated her as the head person, Secretary of Labor, several months ago. As you say, the Republicans are blocking it, plus Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. They both say she's super progressive, so they just don't have the vote. So before, she was deputy secretary, and their policy at the Department of Labor says, okay, well, you can continue to do your duty indefinitely until a successor is appointed, but it violates the whole point of the main rule, which is you can't actually serve in effect as the head person if the Senate isn't going to approve it. So really, Biden is circumventing the appointment process, and business groups are against her. They say she shouldn't be allowed to issue executive orders without Senate approval. One big key issue, John, that she's been involved in is this: how do you classify gig workers like Uber drivers? Are they employees or independent contractors? Well, obviously they're independent contractors. They come and go as they want. They work for a lot of different people. They don't have to wear uniforms. They work whenever they feel like it. And people like to have a side hustle. The problem is it's a political football. The Democrats are saying, oh, my gosh, if you call them an independent contractor, they don't get minimum wage and they don't get overtime. They don't get employee benefits. So we must call them employees. And that's where this Julie Su comes in. She says, yeah, basically everybody on the planet is an employee. And Hillary said the same thing when she was running for president. These people deserve their benefits. Well, maybe they deserve jobs because companies don't hire people if they can't afford them. So California, of course, went nuts recently with this test that basically said if you work in the same industry of the company that hires you as a contractor, poof, you're an employee, and thus you get the minimum wage and so on. The problem is, again, if you force companies to treat people like employees, they won't hire them or they'll hire fewer ones. So this is an example of how she's gone off the rails. Bottom line is the Biden administration is trying to break the rules, and the only question is whether they're going to be allowed to get away with it.
Administrative agencies, executive departments like the Department of Labor, they have a lot of power within their office. They can make administrative decisions, administrative rulings that impact entire industries or certainly specific companies. Let's say you are the owner of Royal Oaks Widget Company and you have an issue that goes before the Department of Labor, and they make a ruling, they make a decision that would negatively impact you and your business, and you lawyer up and you say, hey, wait a minute, She is not constitutionally able to do this because she was never confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and her temporary position has expired. Therefore, any decisions and any orders that she makes are null and void because she is illegitimate as Secretary of Labor. Do you have a case?
Oh, absolutely. It's a totally legitimate case. The only way that an argument that an executive order or a regulation of any department is legitimate and lawful is if the person who's issuing it has a right to do that. So that's another arrow in their quiver. If she keeps issuing these orders and it messes up with employers' rights, then they can go to court and they can say not only is it just a bad order and you should toss it out because it's unconstitutional, but also you should toss it out before you even think about it because she had absolutely no right to issue it in the first place.
If you're Joe Biden, why do you want to fool around with all of these potential problems?
I think he just wants to come across as a friend of the working man, as somebody who's in favor of giving minimum wage and employee benefits and overtime to as many people as possible. And I mean, he's packed his administration with progressive folks on every issue, top to bottom. So I guess it's not surprising that he's fighting this battle, even though it sure seems like he's spitting in the eye of the law.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Royal, some members of the California legislature want to make it so that judges can use race as a factor in sentencing. They believe that the system is racist. They believe that the system has punished people of color, and therefore, to reduce the prison population of people of color, judges should be able to give more lenient sentences to a criminal who is convicted if they are a member of one of those perceived protected classes. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a nutty idea. This AB 8562, it's by Reggie Jones Sawyer. He's an assemblyman from South LA. It would require judges to consider an individual's race when determining their sentencing for criminal offenses, and it says it would help address the disproportionate impact of the justice system on minority communities and promote fairness. It's amazing. I mean, instead, how about this? Keep the criminal law as it is, the way we like it, jaywalking, murder, burglary. But if you find evidence of racism, how about firing the racist judge or prosecutor or cop? But without proof of racism, how about enforcing the laws as written? I mean, what a concept. I mean, I sort of see a compromise coming akin to this recent Supreme Court affirmative action decision where the court said, well, you can't use race. Oh, you can write an essay saying I've had challenges and they relate to race. You can say that. So similar judges, they shouldn't sentence based on race. Oh, you're black, so you get 2 years less. Instead, every defendant in every criminal case, after they're convicted, there's a little pause where they get to argue over their sentence. Weeks go by, you have briefs and so on. And when you argue your sentence should be lower, how about mitigating factors like abuse as a child, like drug use? Like how about being a chronic victim of racism? So you can take all that into account. But to actually say every judge must take race into account, I mean, it's like these people are leading with their chin. It's such an idiotic idea. Don't they realize that common sense folks are going to hear that and say, are you kidding me? But it doesn't stop them from saying abolish the police or abolish prisons or open the borders. It's like when you get to be so progressive to a certain point, all common sense goes out the window. You just ask what you really want, give you a real wish list, even though it's really stupid.
I'm not a lawyer, but Royal, I would imagine that when you went to law school, one of the classes you had to take was about ethics. And I'm sure one of the points that they drove home over and over and over again is that Lady Justice is supposed to be blind to bias, and that includes race. This is not Lady Justice being blind to bias. This is Lady Justice putting her hand on the scale.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's going to fail ultimately, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the Supreme Court has put up with the references to race in the educational admissions process for a long time. But you remember, 25 years ago, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said, okay, I'm going to stick with affirmative action, and she won the day. But she says, I think 20 years from now, we shouldn't have to use race. Well, 20 years went by, he still wanted to use it. Finally, the Supreme Court said that's enough, except you still got the ability to mention it in the admissions letters that I mentioned. But I think, the pendulum is swinging against it. So I think anybody who's now trying to use an explicit reference to race, they're really swimming upstream against the trend.
Royal, what's coming up on the next Too Many Lawyers podcast?
Well, we're going to get back into the Donald Trump situation. He's having, of course, his duel in Washington, D.C. And one big question is he going to be able to get his January 6th trial out of Washington, D.C.? You can count on this judge who doesn't seem to think much of Donald Trump saying no. So the real question is, will the U.S. Supreme Court reach down and give Donald Trump a hand and say, you know what, there's no freaking way that a population that was terrorized by the January 6th riots and who voted 92% to 5 for Biden over Trump, that's not really a fair venue for trials. We're going to get into Trump's chances to get some help from the appellate levels on his court cases.
And, of course, you can download the Too Many Lawyers podcast wherever you download your favorite podcasts. And the weekend is here, so you'll have plenty of time to listen to Royal and Connor on the Too Many Lawyers podcast. Royal, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thanks.
It is my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. She is the former majority leader in the California Senate, Senator Gloria Romero. Senator Romero, welcome.
Thank you. So good to be with you on this Friday.
Absolutely. All right. Earlier in the show, we spoke with Politico's Carla Marinucci. She is the one that broke the story that over lunch last weekend with former Ayatollah of the California Assembly, Willie Brown, Willie dropped the bomb on her that he has been in constant communication with former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And former Governor Schwarzenegger told Willie Brown that he's kicking tires on jumping in to the U.S. Senate race. The state, of course, has an open U.S. Senate seat on the ballot next year in 2024 because incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein has acknowledged that she is not running for re-election. As of now, there are three main candidates in that race, all Democrats and all members of the House. Burbank Congressman Adam Schiff, Oakland Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and Irvine Congresswoman Katie Porter. And those three anticipated two Democrats being on the November ballot because we have a first two runoff system now instead of closed primaries like we used to have in California. If Arnold jumps into the race, all of their math gets turned upside down and we shake the snow globe yet again. You served in the California legislature when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. You've worked with him. You've negotiated with him. You know the way his mind operates. Do you think there's a real possibility at the age of 76 that he would jump in this race?
Well, let me say that I not only think that he could jump into this race, I hope he jumps into this race. And I probably would be the first Democrat to say that I endorse him. This is a time to really shake up, just as you mentioned it, to shake up the political template in California. We need to make major change. I worked with Arnold when he was in Sacramento as governor. We worked across party lines. We did some pretty good education reform, prison changes as well. I don't agree with him on everything. It still is going to be a very blue state, but he probably is about the only non-status quo Democratic candidate who can have a viable run for governor, and with strong bipartisan support like me and others, I think he can win. I really do, and it would be a win for California.
There are a lot of politicians in this state who enjoy safe seats where they put their name on a ballot in a contest where they know they're going to win. And very few politicians are willing to be the underdog or put their career on the line in a race where they may win, they may not win. This is not a done deal. If he puts his name on the ballot, as you said, as a Republican or a registered Republican in a state that's overwhelmingly Democrat against well-financed opponents, there's a chance he would lose this race. As someone who worked with Arnold, do you see him as one of these risk-averse people, or do you see him just going all in?
Well, I would take a look at it as he has a great deal of confidence. I think he is somebody who understands the risks, but is willing to take it on. And his whole life story, I think, is really one of taking on the risks. Will he absolutely win? Nobody can predict that. I mean, you have elections, et cetera, going forward. But I do think he is the strongest name to be put forth at this time. I mean, think about it. Today's the day in which, as well, we've seen the launching of a special prosecutor, again, too, in terms of involving the Biden name. Things are in turmoil in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle. He's somebody who I think could potentially have a very real impact on calling on California to say, let's put country over party, let's work across party lines and do the right thing to move us forward. So is he risk adverse? I don't think so. Anybody who somebody like him who's willing to be an action hero in the movies, I think he has demonstrated he's been an action hero in politics. And that means you take on the risks.
So many of his skeletons aren't in the closet. They're dancing on the front lawn. We know about the Me Too allegations on the movie sets. We know about the love child. We know what he did for Fabian Nunez, letting his son, who was convicted of participating in a murder of a young man in San Diego County. Given the fact that we know so many of his problems, we know so many of his flaws, and we've litigated them over and over and over again in a variety of forums, when these come out in the race, when Adam Schiff uses them against him, or Katie Porter, or Barbara Lee, do you think they'll have the same impact, or will most voters say, okay, we already know about this, we're moving on?
Well, they will have a real impact. And I would even add to the list. I mean, I'm one who, although I am ready to, endorse and support him, I also recognize that didn't exactly agree with him in terms of how he viewed our civil liberties when it came to vaccines and our freedoms in California under COVID. So it will be a vicious campaign, make no doubt about it. We're talking about the balance for power in the United States of America, and California is key to that. This state is key to that. But it's not to say that, there aren't, other scandals as well. I mean, certainly what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and some of the vaults will be open to take a look at the positions that some of these status quo, blind to the party Democrats, sadly, have endorsed and supported, also suppressing the freedoms, et cetera. So I don't think anybody should be immune to it. You always have to be prepared. I do think that it's been largely addressed, and there are more to be addressed. But I think it's one where the voters ultimately will have to look at it. There are no saints here. There's a lot of sinners. It's California, okay? There's no saints. But at the end of the day, what are we willing to take a look at? What do we want going forward? Are we happy now? Have we been better off in these last 4 years or 6 years when it comes to a Senate seat? Can we do better? Can we think outside the box? In Arnold's old words, can we blow up the box? And I think if you get a good number of Republicans willing to set aside, he might be a rhino or whatever. I know there's a lot of Democrats just waiting to walk away from the Democratic Party, independents as well. He's done evaluated, and I think Arnold could make a case, but he's got to be honest. He's got to be direct. He needs to make the apologies where they are, just like many of the other candidates will as well. They have to face it as well.
In California, our cities are named after the saints. Our people are modeled after Sodom and Gomorrah.
Appropriately said on a Friday as we get ready for the weekend.
All right, let's talk about one of the other candidates in that race, Adam Schiff, because it has come out through a lawsuit that was filed against the LA County Department of Public Health that in their effort to suppress free speech, they would go through Adam Schiff's office to try to get the big social media companies to punish those who were putting out an alternative point of view. One of those people they tried to censor was me, and Adam Schiff's office was the one that was their liaison to Twitter to try to make it happen. as we keep scratching the surface of this story and finding out more about Adam Schiff's involvement in the suppression of free speech and his connection to the fake Dr. Barbara Ferrer in those efforts, if the other candidates decide to push this story and make this an issue in this race, how problematic is it for Adam Schiff?
I think it's very problematic. And I would even add to that as well. As a Democrat who believes in civil liberties, who believes in First Amendment rights, who believes in you shouldn't have a two-tiered system of justice, I don't care what the last name is, Biden or Trump or somebody else, I'm very disappointed at the leading role that he took in rushing out of these closed briefing sessions and misleading the American public about what was happening, the briefings, et cetera. So there's a lot to account. And let's see if other Democrats like, Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, each with their own, closet issues, whether it's potatoes or bridal support for reparations in the state that most people do not support. Let's see if they have the courage of their convictions to come out and take on Adam Schiff. They should. I think that people are ready for us to have an honest and frank conversation about basically everybody and their preparation for office. I briefly served with Adam Schiff a long time ago when he was in the legislature when I was first elected. I was excited. I worked with him well, but I am disappointed in how partisan he's become over the years as he tried to rise to power in Congress. And also as well, too, I served on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union. I am still one of those Democrats who believe in civil liberties, in First Amendment rights. And it's unfortunate to see how so many Democrats have just trampled on First Amendment rights. I do believe that the vast majority of Californians still want that. We fight for it, and we'll be looking forward to seeing this debate. And that's largely where Adam Schiff falls down. He tried to suppress our rights in ways that just are not tolerable with the Constitution that I believe in.
When you were in the top ranks of the leadership within the legislature, I would imagine, particularly given the fact that we live in an era of term limits where different politicians are termed out and sometimes they have to run against perceived allies for a different office because that's what's required for them to stay on as elected officials, that they would come to you and they would ask you for your blessing, they would ask you for your support. And I'm sure you had friends who would run against each other in some of these races, and you would prefer to stay out of it so that you didn't upset one of your friends or get involved in a fight that you didn't necessarily have to get involved in. Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, has relationships with all three Democrats in the race. And instead of staying out of it like you would assume that she would do, she's all in for Adam Schiff. Even though Barbara Lee is a longtime supporter of her, certainly voted for her for Speaker in election after election, represents the neighboring district, by the way, to Nancy Pelosi's district in San Francisco, Oakland, of course, being across the bay. And Katie Porter, not necessarily one of Nancy Pelosi's favorites, but did flip a district that the Democrats had their eyes on and certainly provided an extra vote for her for Speaker in what was a narrowly divided House the last time Nancy Pelosi served as Speaker. Why do you think Pelosi's going all in for Adam Schiff, given all that?
Well, I think it's understandable given that Pelosi was the Speaker and Adam Schiff essentially was in leadership when it came to her political agenda, and that was the impeachment by any means necessary. Not only once, but twice. And Adam Schiff played a lead role there. That was Nancy Pelosi's agenda. It's part of a bigger political issue. So while she served with all of them, I think it's really looking at he was part of her leadership team for the political ends that she was trying to maneuver and get to. So I can see it there. Is it the best choice? I don't think so. On the other hand, too, I think she saw Barbara Lee. I've always liked Barbara Lee as a politician. I personally don't think she has much of a pathway to win in an election in California. And that's why I think there's been pressure to try to get Gavin Newsom to use basically identity politics to say you got to have the African American woman, in this race. And so far, that hasn't happened. Katie Porter, brand new, sort of, I think, too, Pelosi could easily write her off, even though there are some other factors, personal factors, I think, that impinge that relationship. But I get the relationship with her and Adam Schiff. It's largely thinking about the drive to leadership, and basically he has been one of her top lieutenants. I think it's a mistake. I think that whole drive was a mistake. I think it's going to backfire in the presidential elections, and hopefully it will backfire on Adam Schiff in this election. And I would hope that both Katie Porter and Barbara Lee, or any other Democrat, and then a Republican, whoever enters, takes that on.
Gloria Romero, former majority leader in the California Senate, thanks so much for stopping by on this Jimmy Buffett Friday. Have yourself a wonderful weekend.
You as well. Thanks.